before we begin, actually, we have a caller calling in. So we're going to get to the caller, and then we have an interesting format for the rest of the show. So caller, I'm going to put you on right now. How you doing? What's your name?
Hi, Nate. My name is Alex. Can you hear me fine?
Alex, how you doing?
Very good.
I'm good. I'm very excited to be here.
Good. Great, Alex. Go ahead, Nate.
So I have a question for Dr. Lisle. It is about narcissistic and borderline personality traits. Like you guys are talking about personality traits. And I have recently became aware of these two traits. And apparently they are frequently encountered in context of relationships, and they are very, very destructive. And I was wondering if there is some kind of evolutionary reason for these traits to evolve and come to be. And I would like to hear your opinion on that.
Yes, very good question. Very interesting question. The personality traits are they are the result of this is very much. Let me see how I'm going to say this. Personalities are put together out of a mixture of genes, and there are ways to sort of slice up what these genes are up to, and there's 6 major categories of typical human responses that we can use. They're essentially the ingredients of the human personality, and this would be similar or akin to if we were going to talk about athleticism. We would say, okay, well, how fast can you run? How high can you jump? How long can you run? How much weight can you lift? In other words, there would be a few different measurements or a few different characteristics that would define athleticism. The same thing would be true of beauty. We could define beauty quite effectively with a half a dozen characteristics, and it would all make sense to us. In the same way that the human personality, how people are different from one another, also winds up being able to be defined quite well by a half a dozen variables. And those variables are they're known as the big 5 in personality theory plus intelligence. And so the big 5 are openness to experience, conscientiousness, the introversion, extroversion, or how sociable people are, how agreeable they are, and how emotionally stable they are. And so those 5, called the big 5, emerge repeatedly in studies of personality as the 5 major factors that define individual differences in people. Now, each of these characteristics, when they're measured, they fall in bell curves. So each individual, just as they fall on a bell curve as to how tall they are, and they fall on a bell curve and how fast they can run, they also fall on bell curves on how intelligent they are, and they fall in bell curves on all these other 5 variables like openness to experience, conscientiousness, introversion, extroversion, agreeableness, and emotional stability. Now, so psychologists and psychiatrists will label people out of convenience as well as sort of a early primitive knowledge of personality. So early thinking and personality tend to think of personalities as types. And so what you are referring to as borderline personality disorder or narcissistic personality disorder, we're calling these disorders as if there's a malfunction and as if this is a type. It's not a type. What these are descriptions in the same way that we would say that a man that is 6'6" is tall. Okay, so we just use a word that gives a category and we say, well, he's very tall. Okay, so we know what that means. We know that he's not 5'7" if we say he's very tall. Because it's a description, a relative description of how people are relative to other people. Now, the narcissistic personality disorder, for example, is a description of somebody who obviously is very, very full of themselves, thinks very, very highly of themselves, and the way that they think about themselves as being very special is actually inconsistent with the truth. Okay, so that's what's striking people as odd about their behavior is that they are acting as if they should be treated like Elvis Presley, but they are not in fact Elvis Presley. So as a result, those people are very irritable often, and they can be supremely confident that they are right about things, and that they feel like other people are not treating them fairly, et cetera, et cetera. Now let's look about what this is, because this should be inside the big five, and it is. So what a narcissist is actually somebody that's very disagreeable, and so a narcissistic personality disorder is essentially nothing other than the high disagreeability. If you start looking at 96th, 97th, 98th, 99th percentile in terms of disagreeable, this is what this is. These people feel like they are extremely deserving of things that they are not deserving of, and the reason why they think so is that their essential mechanism for determining fairness is actually miscalibrated because they happen to be a genetic outlier. So there is not an evolutionary reason why this, quote, type exists. So this is not like suddenly we've got somebody with blue hair and we've got to figure out why there's a type. It's not a type. It's simply a gene variant. It's the same reason you've got men that are 6'8". They are simply a genetic outlier, and they happen to be sitting at a spot in the bell curve, and that's what that is. Now, in relationships, obviously, people that are narcissistic people are very difficult to deal with. And so relationships require some sort of exchange process. In fact, that's what relationships are, is exchange processes between individuals. And so in romantic relationships, narcissists are very problematic because they are essentially believing that they are not being treated fairly very often in the relationship. And so they are signaling this by being very irritated and angry a great deal of the time. And so as a result, those are problematic individuals. But just as very tall people exist and very short people exist and very smart people exist and very stupid people exist, narcissists, quote, exist as simply a person that is sitting on a place on a bell curve. Now, borderlines are a little bit more interesting. So borderline is the original conception of a borderline was a notion from psychoanalytic psychology in the early 20th century. It was the notion that these people were so odd and so volatile that maybe they were a little bit crazy. Okay, so it was a vague notion that maybe they're halfway between neurotic and psychotic. This turns out to be not true. So this was just they got a name that really doesn't mean what it is that they are. What they are is they're actually disagreeable and unstable. So they are highly unstable inherently. And so what we're going to do is we're going to look under the stability dimension to try to understand why that individual difference variable exists. The instability in emotional tone is going to go a long ways. It's essentially a computation, a derivative of a computation about how much energy one should put into some opportunity or avoiding some disaster. So you can imagine someone that is so stable that there's a tremendous opportunity right next door to him, and he is, somebody just invented McDonald's right next door, and the guy came over and said, hey, do you want to buy one of these franchises? And he's like, no, I don't think so. I'm just not that big a deal. Okay? So this would be someone who is too stable to actually cash in on what a normal member of the species would realize was worth energy putting in. Okay, that would be a highly stable person on one end of the continuum. On the other end of the continuum would somebody that would be very unstable. So they would have tremendous amount of energy for investing time and energy and effort into things that may not make sense. And it may be, for example, they may be feeling like there are threats that they have to really shore up, and they have to really be careful. So they might be quite paranoid about things, or they can also be very excited about things. And so they typically, the most classic borderline patient is going to be a female. And there's going to be reasons for this. And we're going to see this is going to be very often a female characteristic. So borderline females are, I think they outnumber men about 9-to-1 diagnostically, or some very high ratio like that. The reason is that the nature of mating in humans and females, in humans, between males and females, is that in our species, the female does a tremendous amount of investing in offspring, much more so than will necessarily be seen in other species. In other words, we only have one child per year. Many other species will have 4 or 5 or 100 children. So we are an extremely high investment species when it comes to parenting. So therefore, sexuality is particularly expensive and important to people, particularly the following issue in sexuality, which is male investment. So in our species, we have pair bond psychology where females are attempting to optimize the resources that they get out of mating with males. And so they're designed by nature to try to be very picky and fussy about making very, very good choices in this arena. Now, you can imagine if you were a very unstable female. The problem is that you would see something that looked attractive and you would be much more motivated to pursue it, all things being equal, than a female that was much more stable. And so as a result, one of the most attractive opportunities for females that actually tickles their sexuality is men that are fancier than they are, that come on to the female under the strategy of casual mating. And that the males will, so in other words, if a male is a 9 and a female is a 7, the female is designed by nature to be very excited about this possibility. But an inherently normally stable female smells a rat, and she does not jump into bed with this male because she feels like this is too risky, and she better just find out what happens and at least wait a couple of dates. But if you are a very unstable female, you happen to be on the bell curve of high instability, then you will jump into bed in the next hour, okay? But what happens is you are also then very excited because the male has actually made some noises about how special he thinks you are, so therefore you're also thinking that you're in a pair bond situation, okay? So this is a borderline. So borderlines get extremely sexual very quickly with men. The men are clearly playing casual mating strategy, but they're making the borderline an offer that the borderline cannot refuse. When the borderline then finds out the next morning or 2 hours later that they are being rejected, that they in fact did not qualify for a pair bond strategy, they are outraged and they feel like that they have been lied to, which in effect they sort of were. But the male is thinking, my God, chick, didn't you see the handwriting on the wall? What the hell did you expect? I only met you last night. But to the borderline is saying, oh no, you son of a bitch. Like, how could you do this to me? It happened again, okay? And so they are enraged, they are miserable, they are suicidal, they are murderous. In other words, this is the characteristic of the borderline. You will not see it as typical in males because males cannot be deceived and effectively ripped off by females around their sexuality in the way that males can rip off female sexuality. So that is why you see the unstable and also very often threads of disagreeable. It helps to manufacture a borderline personality disorder if you are also somewhat disagreeable, so you believe you've got more coming to you than you do. So if you, once again, if we go back to a situation where the female is a 7 even if she's unstable, but she's very agreeable, interestingly enough, she may feel like this guy is too fancy and that this is not a fair trade. And therefore, that will engineer her to be more careful in that exchange. But if she's a little disagreeable, she doesn't see anything wrong with the 9 coming on to her, because after all, she feels like she's sort of a 9. And so now she gets into this thing like wildfire, winds up bitterly angry and murderously enraged and also devastated. And this is where we see the root. This is what a borderline is. So once again, a borderline is not a type. These are matters of degree, and they fall out naturally out of the variances that we see in the Big Five. So I hope that explains this.
Yeah, it's just a phenomenal answer, and I will have to listen to it again to catch most of it. If I can ask you a follow-up question.
Sure.
So, from my understanding, both borderlines and narcissists, in the beginning of a relationship, they kind of they play to the liking of a partner. They almost like adopt a fake personality for a certain amount of time, and at some point in the future, the mask comes off and like the true personality shines through. And I'm not sure how is this related. Is this similar to what you were saying about a human's capacity for self-deception, or is it some kind of adaptation?
Yeah, no, I think that early in relationships, all human beings essentially entice people into the relationships by pretending that they are better than they really are. So this is not a characteristic of the borderline or the narcissist. This is a pan-human characteristic. It's species-wide. Okay, so this is how Ford tries to lure you away from Chevy, is that they use whatever shameless procedure they can to try to, rebate, discount, et cetera, anything that they can do. There's stuff that'll show up on your doorstep with some company's going to give away a free sample. Everybody is trying to essentially shake you out of your existing trading situations that you're in and trying to lure you into new relationships with them if they are seeking you. And so the way we lure people into relationships is by essentially painting a rosy picture over the cost-benefit analysis of the value proposition that we bring to the relationship. And so this is why everybody early in a dating relationship, I can remember 10 years ago, I went on a date on Match.com, and the woman was a medical doctor. She was a bright lady, and she had great pictures, and I was looking forward to meeting her. And I met her, and of course, she was 25 pounds heavier than her pictures, and I was instantly uninterested. Okay, so we had a very pleasant lunch in San Francisco, and I chatted with her, and she was a nice gal, and I could tell, I'm not flattering myself, I'm no prize, but I was prize enough for her, and so she was very interesting. And what I started hearing for the last half hour of the lunch was how she always during this time of year always puts on this weight, and then it miraculously comes off, pretty soon afterwards. And so she kept selling this. So what she was doing is she had given me a phony value proposition with photography that wasn't true, thought it would be fine, meets me, and then has the anxiety of realizing that she may not have a sufficient value proposition, and then starts selling me on how it is that it's going to be better in the future. This is going to be human nature 101. And so the borderline and the borderline will essentially know that she's got some troubles with stability and some disagreeability. So people in general are going to demonstrate more agreeability than is true for them. That makes sense. In other words, when you're trading in relationships, what relationships are is all they are is value propositions that are being analyzed through cost-benefit analysis. And the cost-benefit analysis in this case isn't donuts you get from the donut store. It is actually genetic cost-benefit analysis along the genetic values that human beings trade. And they trade the big five, okay? And they trade their athleticism, and they trade their beauty, and they trade their capability in the marketplace to get resources. And so the borderline is well aware that, just like every human is, that you got to act more agreeable than you really are. And they also know that they need to act more stable than they really are. And so it isn't that the mask comes off, it's that the mask always comes off of everybody. And in this case, if a borderline is acting like she's at the 80th percentile for instability, but she's really at the 96th percentile, that 16 percentile difference has phenomenal consequences. But she can act that way and therefore bluff a guy into a situation that he thinks he's safe, but he's not anything close to safe. Whereas that same 16 percentile bluff, if we've got a woman who is, say, for example, she's actually at the 40th percentile for agreeable for females. She's a slightly disagreeable female, but totally in the normal range. And she bluffs that, in fact, she's at the 56th percentile for agreeable. The guy is thinking, oh, great, this is a sweet person. I'm not going to have problems or conflict with interest with her. You know, she'll go to the movies 56% of the time of the places that I want, you know, when I want to go. So he's feeling like he's going to get a better deal than he's really going to get. When he finds out, when all the smoke clears 4, 5, 6 months later, that it is not quite as good a deal, at least it's functionally reasonably similar, and he may feel like he got hosed, but he didn't get hosed that badly. Whereas with a borderline, the difference between a 96 percentile disagreeable and an 80 percentile disagreeable is huge, because as you get out to the extremes of the bell curves, those functional differences are phenomenal. The differences in height and the utility of heights, for example, out of the bell curve are extraordinary. It is estimated that 20% of every man between the ages of 20 and 40 living in the United States that is 7 feet tall is now employed in the National Basketball Association. Okay? Extremes are fascinating and potentially useful and dramatic. And in the case of high instability, disagreeable females, you don't see that borderline coming, not because they are so deceptive with a mask. It's because we are all deceptive, but that amount of deceptiveness is enough to mask a tremendous liability that they're walking in with. And the same is true with a narcissist. So I hope that's useful. Okay.
Within the realm of clinical psychology, and there's actually a lot of different approaches, one of which I've come across called emotionally focused therapy. And today we have a guest. His name is Jack Gershfeld, joining us to give us insight into this process. So we're going to see what we can learn by listening to a discussion between Dr. Lisle and Jack Gershfeld. So Jack Gershfeld is a marriage and family therapist. He has a private practice in Southern California where he helps distressed couples to regain the sense of love and intimacy utilizing the emotional focus therapy process. He's an adjunct faculty at Pepperdine University, Graduate School of Education and Psychology Department. Jack, thank you for joining us today. How are you?
Very well, Nathan. Pleasure to be here.
Glad to have you here, Jack.
I'm going to play 3 separate audio clips, one by one, from a clinical psychologist named Sue Johnson. And just a little bit about Sue Johnson, she's actually the primary developer of the technique called emotionally focused therapy. And we're going to play one clip at a time, and after each clip, we're going to get some commentary from Dr. Lisle, and then from Jack, and then Jack will hear from you, and then we can both discuss, and then we can just go to the next clip when we feel like we've come to a good point. Sound good?
Sounds great.
Do opposites attract, and should they?
If you look at the literature in social psychology, no, actually. People are pulled towards similarities. But the tricky part about that is there's lots of different kinds of opposites and similarities. Extroverts sometimes find introverts really fascinating. Right, and really, and willing to listen to them. I'm an extrovert. Maybe I like to have introvert friends because they'll listen while I talk. I like to talk. They like me to talk. So you can have those kinds of things, but that similarity in values really seems to matter in the literature. People who marry and who have long-term marriages usually have similar values, similar outlooks in life. So there are some basic similarities that are there. I think the real issue is not about similarities and differences. It's about how you deal with the fact that you have enough similarity that you can connect and you can see the world in the same way. You can share each other's view in the world. But also how you deal with differences. That's the key issue. And for lots of couples, if you just have differences that are just differences and you have a secure emotional bond, differences can be fun. My husband likes hiking up mountains. I hate hiking up mountains. I don't like hiking at all. If I'm going to hike, it's obvious to me you should hike on flat ground. Why do you want to walk straight uphill? It hurts my feet. I don't like it. At the beginning of our marriage, that was a big deal because it wasn't about hiking. It wasn't about, it was about him saying, if you loved me, you'd come hiking with me. Oh, that's not about hiking. That's a love issue. That's a bonding issue, an attachment issue. So lots of times, differences, which can be fun and you can play with them. These days I go hiking. I sometimes go hiking with my husband. He teaches me how to do it. It expands my life. Differences can be fun. But in the beginning of our marriage, they weren't fun. They were a big issue. And there were lots of emotional arguments about whether I would go hiking with him and what it meant that I didn't want to go hiking with him. Didn't I care about that he wanted me to go hiking with him? So it's tricky. You have to learn to have conversations where you can deal with differences and still reassure each other and still keep this emotional bond safe and strong. If you can do that, you can have lots of differences between you and they can be fun. They can add to your life. They can you can teach each other things that you can give each other different points of view. As long as those differences don't become all mixed up in, do you love me? Do I matter to you? Do you care about my feelings? Do you want to be with me? Once differences get imbued with those emotional dramas, then it can be very difficult for couples.
All right, Dr. Lisle, let's hear from you first.
Well, there's a lot there, and so she's sort of as a clinician, I see her sort of wandering into the weeds. What she's talking about. So I'm going to try to answer the question first, and then recognizing that she said a lot of different things that weren't directed. I don't think to the question in mind. So just for the sake of listeners, we will answer the question, and that is, do opposites attract, and or do we seek similar people, etc. The truth of the matter is that the psychologist here essentially says, well, the literature says that people are drawn to people like them. This is not true, and it is also not true that opposites attract. So let's look at an example to try to understand this, so that we understand this from the fundamental dynamics of biology about what's actually happening in mate selection. What's happening is, let's suppose we've got some fat, bald guy down by the beach, and he's 60 years old with a big pot belly, and what walks by is a 32-year-old smoking, really super attractive female. Now, I would expect we'd all agree that he is attracted to her. So they are not similar. Now, if people were attracted to similar, then what we should be seeing him attracted to would be a fat, balding female with a big pot belly with wrinkled skin that was 60 years old. Okay? He is not attracted to somebody similar to him. He is attracted to somebody extremely different than him. Meanwhile, let's look at the female in this case. So we got the 32-year-old really hot female, and what walks up to her is a handsome 35-year-old tall, lean, athletic, good-looking male. Is she attracted to him? Yes. In fact, that's probably her boyfriend. Okay, so they are similar on these dimensions. They are not different, and so they seem to be attracted to each other. So so we clearly see that in the first case, our bald, short guy is not attracted to similar people. He's attracted to different people, and in her case, she's attracted to similar people. So clearly, both ways of looking at this dynamic are fundamentally flawed. And so this is what is being missed here in the conventional analysis in psychology. What people are attracted to is value. Okay, fundamentally, what a nervous system is, certain kinds of organisms on Earth are animals, and what animals have that plants don't have is a brain. And the fundamental problem of the brain is to actually analyze possibilities for action, targets for action in the environment, and to assign values to those differences. So you assign a difference. If you're a human, you like an apple better than you like a pile of manure when it comes to eating. So you're designed by nature to actually analyze the biological value of certain targets. So in the case of the fat old guy, he's designed by nature to observe that the young hot female is a high biological value target, and he is attracted to it. Okay, she observes him and observes that he is of low biological value, and she is not attracted to it. She is attracted to high biological value mates, as he is attracted to high biological value mates. So we now can understand when people say, well, people sort of wind up with people like them. They don't wind up with people like them because that's what they want. They wind up with people like them because that's as good as they could get. So you have to understand that we trade in relationships. So in a sense, to some degree, in psychology and biology, we will use concepts like mate selection, but that's a little bit superficial. Because the truth of the matter is, it's a useful concept and a word to use. But people don't select their mates; they compete for and then wind up getting what they can get. So, for example, if you were shopping for a house in Los Angeles, you would shop with a budget in mind about what you could get. Now, from within what it is that you thought you could get, you would do some selecting on these variables. But believe me, you would prefer to be at the top of the hill in Beverly Hills in Aaron Spelling's mansion than you would like to be in a 500 square foot house or 5-square condo in some marginal area. Okay? So, but why did you pick that? According to this notion of attraction and selection and similarity, well, the people that live in areas where there's gunshots and stuff like that, they just like that because they're attracted to that area, and they go to where there's people like them. That's not true. They don't want to be there. They want to be somewhere entirely different. And our little fat guy at the beach there doesn't want to be where he is, but he's doing the best he can. So when it comes to personality, people are not attracted to people like them. They are attracted to value. And now let's look down through the big five and intelligence, the thing that we were just talking about earlier. Let's look and see if there's any indication from the way we use the language that indicates whether or not there are value judgments that are being discernible in here in these descriptions. Which would we be more attracted to, a highly conscientious person or a flake? Okay, I think we can all agree what we'd be attracted to. Which would be more attracted to, a highly agreeable person or a highly disagreeable person? I think we know. Okay. Would we be more attracted to stable or unstable? Would we be more attracted to extroverted or outgoing versus introverted? Would we be more attracted to intelligent or stupid? Okay? We can see that personality characteristics have value, and there are better specimens and worse specimens. In the same way that beauty is actually a very good detector of gene quality in humans, so the fact that you have preferences, there are universal preferences of beauty that are inviolate. It's very clear across cultures, people value the same things when it comes to physical beauty. Certain ratios in the face, for example, and certain bodily features are universal features of human value for our species. And the same thing is true with personality. So you people wind up, in general, people that are reasonably similar in conscientiousness wind up together, because highly conscientious people are not attracted to flakes. Now, are flakes attracted to conscientious people? Yes, they are, okay? But they can't get them because they're out of their budget. That's a house that's too expensive. Now, when we sometimes find that people are on opposite ends of one of these 6 continua, it's going to turn out that's because somebody made a sacrifice in some other area. So, for example, some woman that's agreeable might be willing to take on a disagreeable male because he's handsome. So she's trading problems in one area to try to get better in another, and she's interested in handsome because she would then have better looking children who would put them in a position to compete for mates in future generations. So when we understand human mate selection for personality, we need to look at it from the standpoint of optimizing an evolutionary budget that the person is facing, and that will help explain the mystery of whether or not people are, quote, attracted to similar others or attracted to opposites. They are attracted to value, and that slash is the Gordian knot of this mystery.
All right, Jack. Now you do emotionally focused therapy, and you're familiar with Sue Johnson's work. Let's get a comment from you. What do you think?
Well, thank you, Nathan. Thank you, Doug. A very interesting discussion. Do opposites attract? I think you can look at this question in a little bit different views. One is the instant you meet the person, whether you're attracted, or can you sustain the relationship over a long period of time? And I think that Susan Johnson was quite pointed in saying that what we attract to is not opposites. We attract to the sense of safety, sense of security, sense of belonging, sense of acceptance and understanding. And when, of course, there's when you meet the first person, the first time the person, there will be some physical attraction. But beyond physical attraction, there's also an emotional attraction. And emotional attraction really can't survive without attachment. And Susan Johnson kind of went into different directions explaining this. But the essence of staying together and the essence of being together is when people have similarities and when they can answer simple questions to each other. Do I matter? Am I important? Will I be there for you when you need me? When the questions are answered yes from both sides, the relationship becomes strong and people can be together for a long period of time. When those questions are answered as no, or any one of those questions, then there's a fight and flight response from one of the persons. I'm not loved. You don't care. I'm not important. So in looking at the question at hand, do opposites attract? I would say that there's a physical attraction in the beginning, but at some point it needs to be converted into a long-term relationship. And once it's converted into a long-term relationship, it's not about physical characteristics of the person. It's about emotional safety, emotional connection, feeling of belonging, have a safe place to come to, have a safe person that you can talk to, somebody you can be vulnerable with and know that they will be there for you. They will help you to get through difficult times. And study after study shows when there's secure attachment between mother and child, which actually translates later in secure attachment in couples, people become stronger. They become stronger and they are more willing to go out in the world and risk because they know when something happens, they can go back to the person who is their secure attachment person and they can weather the storm together. And in this particular case, the question is somewhat difficult because it only talks about one instant in time. But if we look at the totality of the relationship from the very first time you meet the person to the time you spend and decide to spend the rest of your life with this person, then similarities are much more important. And Susan Johnson mentioned it very well, that similarities in values are critical and a basic outlook on life. Now, the differences, yeah, they may be there, and we can talk about physical differences, but we also can talk about the emotional differences or differences of liking something versus not liking something. But when there's a safe connection between the couple, and when they know that the other person is a safe person to be with, then those differences are very easy to resolve. And so I kind of see this more of a long-term relationship question versus an instant in which you see the person and make a decision whether you're going to be with that person or not. But in the physical sense, every time you look at the person, if they smile back to you, in a way they're answering your question. Am I met her? And when that feeling is there, you may have a strength to approach that person. But if you look at the other person and they turn around and or don't look at you or give you a look that you're not welcome, then the question to your the answer they provided to you, no. And once that answer is received, then you know this is not the safe place to go to.
Very interesting. Now, and I'm noticing two different approaches from the spectrum. Is there any comments from you, Dr. Lisle, or from Jack, about the differences and what your two approaches?
Yeah, I actually see these discussions as somewhat apples and oranges. We're talking about a little bit different things. I was answering the issue of human nature. And human nature's issues with humans have had a timeless question about do opposites attract or do people that are more similar attract? And, of course, I was answering that question and resolving the mystery by using the concept of essentially evolutionary budgets, that we compete for mates and we try to optimize our decision-making with whatever that we're capable of doing. What Jack's talking about is sort of the notion that the notion is that the critical feature in relationships is what I'm going to call an esteem dynamic, and that is whether or not you're valued. And so what he's putting his finger on is that, and what Ms. Johnson was talking about is that the critical issue is whether or not you get that signal, and that you signal to each other that you are very, very valuable. And the question that we are being asked is, why are you either valuable or not valuable? Okay? So, of course it is true that if two people value each other highly, then we have a positive esteem dynamic where there's security in the relationship. If we have a situation where it is going awry, where we are getting signals where we are not that valuable, these signals are not a matter of choice as to the person that is our partner. These are signals that are emanating from their biology, where they are computing cost-benefit analysis on how valuable we are in a relationship relative to their perceived alternatives. And so as a result, the turbulence that we're going to see in relationships isn't because people are opposites, and it isn't because we have a lack of turbulence because they're similar. We see turbulence in relationships and in the disturbance of the love connection or the esteem dynamic because one party sees that the other party is not an adequate value proposition. And although this is very sort of technical and cold, the truth of the matter is this is in fact the nature of nature. And so love does not happen on some ethereal plane. It happens in the adaptations, in the evolutionary adaptations of individual human beings. And we will find those mechanisms being activated under conditions where we feel like we've gotten an exceptionally good deal. And that not only includes the person's looks and their life circumstances, but it includes their personality. And the personality budgeting and trading that goes on along the way that I was describing in my first part of the answer about whether opposites attract or they don't.
Jack, do you have any comments?
Well, of course, most of my work is with couples, and when they get distressed, they look for solutions. And we know study after study shows that we have an innate need to be connected. We have an innate need to belong, to be together. In fact, studies shows that when people are alone, the rate of heart attack increases. When people are lonely and not connected, they don't have anybody next to them, somebody to talk to, somebody accept them, they go into depression. So considering that, the work that I do is with couples that already have stressful relationship, and how do we put them on a path of recovery for a lifelong fulfilling relationship. And emotional focus therapy answers this question in practical terms of how do we take a person, regardless of their biological traits, the big 5 traits, regardless of their inclinations based on their genes, how do we take a couple that are currently in distress and move them into the area where the stress goes away and they have a fruitful and fulfilling relationship. That process has been shown highly effectively if emotional focus is on the emotional responsibilities of each person, and also connection on each side to understand what the other person goes through. That process of going from disconnection, from not understanding each other, to the process of being connected, when each partner in the relationship fights for their survival in the relationship, is what determines the outcome of the therapy. So once, going back to the same thing, I kind of agree that we're a little bit discussing apple and oranges. However, in the therapy work, we don't look at the inborn genes that put the personalities or put the person in a specific position in order to take the relationship from distress point to a point where the couple is happy. So if it would be part of the unchangeable characteristics of the person, then the therapies would not work. And in fact, many of the therapies, including cognitive behavioral therapy, narrative therapies, they only provide 17% or so of efficacy, and most of the changes occur because of the relationship between the client and the therapist. In emotional focus process, over 70% of the change occurs due to the process itself, and which pretty much ignores the initial biological traits of the person as they go into the process.
Yeah, you're misunderstanding what I'm talking about. What we're talking about here is to try to use our understanding of evolution to actually get a deeper insight into what the nature of the conflicts are. That those conflicts could be emanating from the personalities, but more often the conflicts are emanating from cost-benefit analyses that people are doing on each other as you are essentially running a value proposition at your mate every day of your life when you're with them. And your mate is running a value proposition on you. And people are running cost-benefit analyses on each other. And what will happen when couples get into distress, as you are describing, Jack, is that there's a disturbance in the esteem dynamic where the communication is suggesting that somebody is thinking about defecting. Okay? And so this essentially is somebody sending a signal to another that is saying, I'm not so sure I want to be here. And this will create anxiety on the person who's receiving this. And it can also, for various and sundry reasons, create a retaliatory response. Okay, this is it's sort of like, well, you can't fire me, I quit. And so they can also then send a reciprocal negative esteem message back to the first party. There's reasons why this is going to be true, and there's the reasons why you see these patterns as pan-human characteristics is because these are manipulative tactics that were put into humans by evolutionary history. If you are about to be dumped in a village by a partner who is sending you signals that you may not qualify, then what you might want to do is you might want to mitigate the status loss in your local Stone Age troop that you were dumped by saying, no, I dumped him first. Okay? And so behind that, you then start retaliating when you're picking up negative signals. And so emotionally focused therapy or any good humanistic supportive psychotherapy for couples is going to try to, this in the history of philosophy is called the Hobbesian trap. That if I attack you and then you attack me back, then I have to attack you and then you attack me back. We have an escalating cycle of a what we're going to call a vicious cycle, and this can tear a relationship apart. So of course, one of the things that we want to do is we want to try to settle that down, and I think that a more emotionally focused communication there, rather than maybe some of the dry communication that might come out of cognitive behavioral therapy and some of the ridiculous communication that may come out of dynamic therapy, I could see could be very useful, very humanistic, settle it down, etc. But we still aren't necessarily confronting the realities that we do not have a, quote, need for belonging in a relationship where we are feeling like we might want to defect. If we had such a great need, then we would never want to defect, okay? People send defection cues to mates for a specific reason, and that is that they are trying to renegotiate the relationship because they feel like they're not getting a good enough deal. And so as they send those little anger signals to a mate, it alarms the mate, makes the mate anxious, and the mate has an opportunity to either respond with anxiety by being conciliatory, or very often they will then send a negative signal back to the original signaler, very often they might, and we could start a vicious cycle. So the use of evolutionary psychology in this sort of notion within relationships is to take this to a deeper, more fundamental level of what is actually taking place. Relationships are trades, and your partner is in fact an asset that you are designed by nature to utilize in order to optimize survival and reproductive biological gain. That is in fact what a partner and what a relationship is. This talk about bonding has nothing other to do with the oxytocin-laden process that is associated with signaling the organism about increasing value to a partner who's demonstrating reliability and therefore stability. That means that they're a good long-term partner and that we have to put up with the vicissitudes. The good therapy, outstanding therapy in the couples arena is going to courageously drive down through the negative esteem signals that are being sent. And we're not going to tell people they shouldn't send them. We're going to try to understand why it is that they are frustrated, why it is that they are seeking to renegotiate the contract in the relationship, and why they are willing to send defection cues to a partner to create that kind of anxiety, as they're signaling to a partner that we better change things or I might have to seek a new relationship. These are legitimate signals, and that pain is legitimate, and therefore I believe that this kind of deep, penetrating insight can inform all sorts of genres of psychotherapy, and certainly this emotionally focused therapy as well. So I would hope that the future in evolutionary psychology will help inform these sorts of efforts to improve this human psychotherapeutic process.
Well, it's a very interesting approach. I mean, definitely that view does not address some of the fundamental things, but I can see where your explanation makes sense to you. The actual factual studies that were conducted on couples show that the people get into arguments, the couples get into arguments because they fight for the relationship. They do not go into arguments because they want to defect. A person.
No, that's not true. You're incorrect. You're incorrect. They are renegotiating.
Well, hold on one second. Hold on, Doug. 1 second, okay? Yeah. I gave you.
Sure.
So, if after the session, I'll be happy to provide you study after study that says that. But the actual mechanism of a distressed couple is when one couple is pursuing a relationship and saying, "I need you, I want you, I need to talk to you. Why are you walking away?" And the other couple says, "It's too difficult for me. I want to protect the relationship," so they withdraw. So one is the withdrawer, one is the pursuer. But the key for both of these for both individuals is to fight for the relationship. The problem is that the coping mechanism they choose to fight for the relationship gets them into a negative cycle, a cycle of escalation. Once this is put in the perspective of attachment, that the reason they fight because they want to be closer, the reason the pursuer pursues the other partner because they want to feel connected, the reason the partner withdraws from the relationship because they feel ashamed or scared and worried because they don't want to have the escalated fight. Once the change occurs, and once they go through the process of understanding and experiencing, not only understanding, but experiencing what a relationship can be when you can be a safe place for your partner and a safe harbor for the relationship, then the dynamics changes and the relationship changes, and they go to the road of recovery.
Very good. I understand what you're talking about. That's good, solid therapy, provided we don't actually have conflicts of interest where we have people signaling defection. And let me tell you something. When people walk through the therapeutic door, very, very often people are signaling defection, and they mean business. And so your painting of this picture is ignoring the fact that a great deal of the negative signaling that goes on has nothing to do with wanting to be closer or being overwhelmed by the situation, but it has to do with very serious negotiating that is happening in the relationships. And that is the reality. To think that human beings, who are the most sophisticated communicators that there are on earth, cannot manage to communicate whether they like a partner, which can be done by wolves and it can be done by koala bears. If human beings cannot do that, then they would indeed be pathetic. So I believe that they can signal very effectively when they are really into a relationship, and they can also signal very effectively when that relationship is in serious trouble because there are value propositions that have now been reanalyzed and the person's considering defection and they're renegotiating. So I believe that what you're describing from the theory of emotional focused therapy, if you're ignoring the serious renegotiation strategy that is taking place here, I think you're missing a bet.